My daughter-in-law thought she could poison me with sweet tea, smile in my face, and ship me off to a nursing home like a forgotten suitcase. She didn't know I'd been recording her every move. So when she told my son it was time to get rid of the old man, I just smiled, thanked them for hosting me for 5 months, and said, "Before I go, let's watch a little home movie I made." 10 minutes into the footage, her face went pale. By the time the police knocked on our door, she was sweating bullets, and David finally saw the woman he married for who she really was. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. I used to think growing old would come with a kind of earned respect. You know, after raising a family, working hard, keeping my promises, people would look at you and see the miles you've walked and maybe, just maybe, offer you a damn seat. But what they don't tell you is that aging turns you invisible, quiet, small, a burden wrapped in memories no one asks about. And it wasn't until I moved in with my son David and his wife Alyssa that I realized just how loud silence could be. It started with a fall. One stupid moment outside the hardware store, slipped on a patch of black ice, cracked 2 ribs, and everything I used to do on my own suddenly needed assistance. I didn't like asking. Still don't. But David insisted I stay with them while I healed. "Just a few weeks, Dad," he said, all proud and earnest, like a man doing his duty. Alyssa smiled too. Big, rehearsed smile, like a politician's wife. I should have known then. Should have read the room. But I was tired, sore, and the idea of staying with family felt safer than any nursing home. That word didn't even live in my vocabulary back then. Funny how quickly that changed. Their house was modern, cold in that way rich people's homes tend to be. No clutter, no photos on the walls, not even a junk drawer. Just granite countertops, faux plants, and a scent that made you feel like you couldn't touch anything. I was given the guest room upstairs. A nice bed, white sheets, and a little desk where I could write in my journal. It's time David steps up and makes a decision. I didn't marry into elder care. I didn't move. I stood there, hose running over my shoes, her words hitting me harder than that sidewalk in January. That's when it first registered. They were planning to send me away. And the saddest part? She wasn't even angry, just inconvenienced. That night at dinner, the conversation was stiff. Chicken breast, steamed vegetables, barely any seasoning. I chewed in silence while they scrolled through their phones across the table. Then Alyssa said it, casually, like she was suggesting a new brand of toothpaste. "David and I have been talking, and we think it's time to look into a long-term care option. You know, for your own comfort." I looked up from my plate. "You mean a nursing home?" She tilted her head and gave me that patronizing smile. "We just want what's best for you. A place where you can get real, professional help." David didn't even meet my eyes. He just kept chewing. That was the part that gutted me the most. I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I had learned long ago that when people think they've won, you let them feel it for a moment. It makes the fall more satisfying. "Of course," I said calmly. "But before I go, I've been working on something I'd love to share." Alyssa blinked. "What kind of something?" "Just a little video. I've been recording moments here. Family memories." She stiffened in her chair. Just for a second. But it was enough. David finally looked at me. "That sounds nice." I nodded, pushing my empty plate forward. "We can watch it tomorrow night. One last family evening before I go." They agreed. What else could they do? But what they didn't know was that this video wasn't filled with cozy memories or cute dog tricks. It was truth, raw and unedited. Because while they'd been planning my exit, I'd been watching too. Listening. Recording. I hadn't meant to, at first. But one night, I caught Alyssa sneaking out the back door in a red dress I'd never seen before. She came back 2 hours later, smelling like a perfume I knew didn't belong to her. So I installed a nanny cam behind the bookshelf in the living room, another in the kitchen vent, a third in the hallway, pointing toward the front door. Tiny, silent watchers, collecting every lie she whispered into her burner phone. 5 months is a long time to live in someone else's house. But it's even longer when that house is full of secrets. The next morning, I went about my day like normal. Made myself eggs. Fed the dog. Sat on the porch with my coffee. Alyssa was unusually quiet. She didn't ask me about the video again, but I saw her wipe her phone clean twice that afternoon. David left for work, and she didn't even pretend to be nice after that. You know, she said while loading the dishwasher. Some people just don't know when they've overstayed their welcome. I took a sip of water. It wasn't the words Alyssa said that kept echoing in my head. It was the silence from David. My boy. My flesh. I raised him better than that, didn't I? I remember carrying him on my back after baseball practice when his legs gave out from exhaustion. I remember staying up through the night when he had bronchitis in middle school. And I sure as hell remember sitting across from him at that college financial aid office, signing papers with shaking hands just to make sure he had a shot at the future. A real shot. And now he couldn't even look me in the eye while his wife mapped out my exile over dry chicken and steamed carrots. Still, I smiled. That was the first part of my plan. The most important one. Let them believe I had no fight left in me. I kept myself busy that day. Cleaned the porch, fixed the squeaky door to the guest bathroom, even topped off the salt in the water softener. Alyssa didn't speak to me. She floated through the house like I was a light fixture she'd grown to hate. David came home late that evening and muttered something about traffic, but I saw the guilt on his face, thick and shiny, like oil floating on water. He kissed Alyssa on the cheek. She flinched. Tension in the air so sharp it could cut. Over dinner, leftover lasagna, they talked about nothing. Some coworker's wedding, a show they'd started binge-watching. I just nodded along, chewing slowly, not saying much, until I finally did. So, I said, setting my fork down gently. You both still up for movie night tomorrow? Alyssa hesitated for half a second. Sure, she said too quickly. Of course. David looked confused. What movie? I smiled and wiped my mouth. Something I put together. Clips from the last few months. Just memories. Figured we could all watch together before I head out. He smiled, genuine, or maybe relieved. That sounds nice, Dad. Alyssa didn't smile. She excused herself halfway through the meal, claiming a headache. After they went upstairs, I stayed behind. Sat in that cold, pristine kitchen under the hum of the fridge, staring at the light reflecting off the countertop. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and turned it over in my palm. I had watched the clips more times than I care to admit, memorized the timestamps, the way Alyssa's expression changed when she thought no one was watching, the way her voice dropped when she called that man. I still didn't know his name, giggling like a teenager as she told him how easy it would be once I was safely out of the picture. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the affair. It was the mug. My favorite one, the one with #OneDad on it, that she used to serve me tea every other night. And the footage, clear as day, of her pulling something from a brown medicine bottle and stirring it in before handing it to me with a smile. That kind of betrayal doesn't just sting, it scorches. I called Frank again that night. Put the phone on speaker while I pretended to read the newspaper in my room. You sure about this? He asked, his voice gravelly with sleep and years of biting his tongue when he shouldn't have. I'm sure, I said quietly. They're planning to move me into a home. They think you're weak. They don't know I've been paying attention. There was a long pause. I sent the clips over to a friend in Adult Protective Services. Just in case. You want to file now or after? After, I said. I want them to see it. I want David to see all of it. Frank exhaled. All right. But if things get messy, you call me. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I will. The next day was uneventful, almost suspiciously so. Alyssa was cordial, which was more unsettling than her usual frost. She even asked if I needed anything from the store, and when she returned, she brought me a magazine I used to subscribe to, Woodworking Today. It was so out of character I nearly laughed. It was Damage Control. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know when. That night, I dressed in a clean button-down shirt. I combed my hair. David set up the living room, turning the TV to HDMI, too, while Alyssa poured wine. Let's see what you've got, she said, crossing her legs. I popped in the USB and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered. It began simply, footage of the garden I'd tended, the dog running in circles, a time-lapse of the sunrise from the back porch. David smiled. Alyssa pretended to. Then came the kitchen footage, me washing dishes while Alyssa scrolled through her phone, whispering. What's this part? She asked. I didn't answer. Then, The timestamp changed. The footage showed her slipping out of the house in a red dress, heels in hand. Another clip, her at the kitchen table, telling someone over the phone how David didn't even notice the money missing from the account. Her laughing, saying, "Once his old man is out of here, it'll be easier to convince him." David sat forward. "What is this?" Then came the tea. Frame after frame of her stirring something into my mug. Her smile. My hand reaching out, trusting. The living room was silent. Then Alyssa stood up. "Turn it off," she hissed. "This is insane. You've been spying on us." David didn't move. He was staring at the screen like it had punched him. "I said turn it off," she screamed, grabbing for the remote. I held it away from her. "You wanted me out? You're going to get your wish." Then the doorbell rang. 3 knocks followed. Heavy. Official. David stood up, dazed. Alyssa froze. "Who was that?" I walked to the door and opened it slowly. "Mr. Thompson?" a uniformed officer asked. "We received a report of elder abuse and potential poisoning." Alyssa gasped. "This is insane. This is a setup." I stepped aside. The officer gestured to another cop behind him. "Ma'am, we'd like you to come with us." David stepped back, almost stumbling. "You're not serious?" Alyssa shrieked, grabbing her purse. "David, say something." He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in months. "Is it true?" he asked. Alyssa opened her mouth, closed it, then ran. They caught her before she made it to the fence. Neighbors stood outside in robes and slippers. One was recording on their phone. The lights on the cruiser painted the driveway in harsh red and blue. And I just stood there, quiet, watching it unfold like a scene I'd already seen in a dream. David sank to the curb, head in his hands. "Dad." I said nothing. I had said enough. The cruiser pulled away with Alyssa in the back seat, her screams muffled behind glass and sirens, but still ringing in my ears. The moment should have felt triumphant, vindicating even. But as the red and blue lights disappeared down the street and the neighbors began to retreat into their houses, all I felt was tired. David was still sitting on the curb, elbows on his knees, fingers laced behind his neck like he was trying to hold his head from falling off. I stood in the doorway for a minute, watching him, unsure of what came next. There's no manual for a moment like that. No script for how a father is supposed to console his son after exposing his wife for emotional, financial, and possibly criminal betrayal. He didn't look up when I finally stepped outside. The night air was cool, and the street was quiet again. Peaceful, if not for the storm rolling behind David's eyes. "I didn't know," he said, voice small, cracked. "I didn't know any of it." "I know," I said softly. He looked up at me then, face pale, eyes rimmed red. "How long have you known?" I didn't lie. "A while. Long enough to be sure. Long enough to give her a chance to stop." He shook his head and let out a humorless laugh. "Jesus." I sat down beside him, careful not to groan as my ribs protested. The pavement was cold through my pants. She was good at hiding it. "And you didn't want to see it." "I didn't," he admitted. I kept telling myself she was just stressed, that she was trying her best. I nodded. "We all do that. Make excuses for people we love." He didn't answer for a long time, just stared at the cracks in the driveway like he could fall into them if he looked hard enough. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I turned to him. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. Not without proof. Not with the way you looked at her." "I know that look. I had it once for your mother." David winced. "You loved her," I continued. "You built a life with her. And when someone threatens that version of reality, it's easier to pretend they're wrong than to face that everything you've built is already broken." "I should have seen it," he whispered. "She made sure you didn't." The silence between us stretched long and wide. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and a car door slammed. Life kept moving. It always does. After a while, David stood up, brushing dust from his pants. "I'm going to bed." I can't think right now." I nodded and rose with him. "I understand." He started toward the door, then stopped. "Thank you," he said, without turning around, "for not letting it go." I watched him disappear inside, and then I stood there for another minute, feeling a kind of loneliness I hadn't felt since the funeral. Not because I was sad, but because there are some moments in life where you realize just how much pain people carry while smiling through dinner and asking about your day. The next morning was strange. The house felt heavier, emptier. No Alyssa making French press coffee with her perfectly manicured nails. No passive-aggressive questions about how long I planned to stay. Just me, David, and a silence that neither of us knew what to do with. He didn't go to work. Just sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal going soggy, staring at the spot where the laptop used to sit. I made coffee, real coffee. None of that almond-milk nonsense Alyssa insisted on. Poured him a cup and sat across from him. I checked the bank account, he said finally. She opened 2 credit cards in my name. Racked up over $18,000. And that's just what I've found so far. I didn't say I'm sorry. It would have felt cheap. She said she was helping with the bills. That her job didn't pay much, but she wanted to contribute. He laughed bitterly. I used to thank her for being so responsible. She wanted control, I said. The money gave her that. You brought me in and disrupted the illusion. That's why she turned. He nodded. I talked to the officer this morning. They found trace amounts of a sedative in the tea mug. Over the counter, but still dangerous in the doses she was using. A knot twisted in my stomach, even though I'd suspected it all along. She wanted me out, I said. That was one way to speed it up. David clenched his jaw. They said it could count as attempted abuse or even assault if they can prove intent. Her lawyer's already spinning it, calling it an accident, saying I had a history of anxiety and she was just trying to help me sleep. I raised an eyebrow. So now I have anxiety? Apparently, he said, sighing. We sat in silence for a bit, sipping our coffee. Then I said, you don't have to do anything for me. Not now. Not about this. But you do need to decide who you are when people you trust disappoint you. David looked at me. You think I'm weak? I shook my head. No. I think you're human. He didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, like that hurt worse than any accusation. That afternoon, he started cleaning. Like a man possessed. Stripped the bed, boxed up Alyssa's things, unplugged her vanity mirror, dumped her half-used lotions in the trash. I didn't stop him. He needed it. Some people cry. Some people punch walls. David cleans. I sat on the porch and called Frank. She's out on bail, he said. But the investigation's open. APS is going to interview you. Be honest. Calm. Let them do the rest. Thank you, I said, for having my back. Always, he replied. You did the hard part. You showed restraint. That's rare these days. When I hung up, I watched the sunset. Watched the sky bleed pink and orange over the rooftops of a neighborhood that no longer felt like a prison. Later that night, David knocked on my door. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not yet. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. He looked tired, but firmer somehow. You're staying until you want to leave. And not a day before. I studied him. The man I raised. The man who had finally stood up, not just to Alyssa, but to himself. I appreciate that, I said. But I think it's time I found a place of my own. You don't have to go. I know, I said. But I want to. He nodded. Can I help? Start by forgiving yourself, I told him. The rest will come. It only took 24 hours for Alyssa to start rewriting the story. I should have expected it. People like her don't go down quietly. Not when they've built their whole identity on appearances. And certainly not when they've been exposed like a magic trick with the wires still showing. But still, the speed of her spin stunned me. I hadn't even finished packing the small overnight bag I'd decided to carry to Frank's place. Just a few essentials while I figured out my next move. When David came downstairs with his phone clutched like it was burning a hole in his palm. You need to see this, he said, voice clipped, eyes dark. He handed me the phone. A Facebook post. Alyssa's name in bold above a status that reeked of desperation masked as grace. These last few days have been incredibly difficult. I'm heartbroken and overwhelmed by the false accusations being made against me. Mental health is a serious issue, especially in older adults. I tried my best to help, to care for a man who refused help, who made our home hostile. I loved my husband and his father. But when kindness is weaponized against you, sometimes the only option left is to protect yourself. Over 100 likes. Dozens of comments. You're so strong, girl. They never see what women go through behind closed doors. Sending love and healing vibes. Stay safe. I handed the phone back to David. Well, I said, there it is. The real show's starting. He looked like he'd swallowed glass. She's trying to turn it around. Make it look like you're the one who's unstable. That's how it works, I said. She lost control of the truth, so she's creating a new one. One that fits the story she needs to survive. David sat down hard on the arm of the couch. I hate this. I hate how fast people believe her. I nodded. They don't know what you do. They see a pretty face and a sad story. She said I was manipulated by you, that you've always been toxic. That part one expected. I said, you believing it? That was the part that nearly broke me. David looked up, eyes wide with guilt. I didn't. I know, I interrupted gently. I know you didn't. We didn't speak for a while after that. He scrolled through the rest of the comments like a man sifting through wreckage, looking for proof he hadn't lost his mind. But what he didn't know yet, what I had learned long ago, is that sometimes people want to be lied to. The truth is heavy. It comes with consequences. But lies? Lies are easy to carry until they collapse on top of you. By noon, the fallout had spread beyond social media. David's phone buzzed constantly. Co-workers, friends, even an aunt from out of state who hadn't called in years. One of his clients, a family law attorney, texted him privately. Hey, saw your wife's post. If you ever want to talk options, I'm here. David stared at the message for a long time before locking the phone and sliding it face down on the counter. She's going to try and ruin you, I said plainly. He nodded. I think I'm finally ready to stop letting her. The doorbell rang a little after 2. David froze. You expecting someone? I asked. He shook his head and stood up slowly, peeking through the side window. His face went pale. It's her, he whispered. What? I stood. She's out on bail. She's not supposed to contact you. She's alone. He opened the door before I could stop him. Alyssa stood there on the porch in oversized sunglasses and a beige trench coat, like some B-list movie star in a scandal. Her hair was messy, too messy to be natural, and her expression was a mix of panic and performance. David, she breathed, please, just let me talk to you. You're not supposed to be here, he said, voice tight. I know, she said quickly. I needed to explain. I needed to see you. Please. I stepped forward. No, you don't get to rewrite this at my front door. She turned to me, her mask slipping for just a second. You think you're so clever? Recording me like some old creep. David raised his voice. Enough. She flinched. You drugged my father. You lied to my face. You stole from me. And now you're trying to play the victim online. Tears sprang into her eyes immediately, on cue. I panicked, she sobbed. Okay. I was scared. I didn't know what he'd say about me. I didn't know what people would believe. So I tried to get ahead of it. That's all it was. David just stared at her. You tried to get ahead of the truth. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, she whispered. You almost killed him, he snapped. You drugged a 70-year-old man in my house. You don't get to come here and cry your way out of that. She stepped forward. David, please. If we just... He stepped back. No. Go. Before I call the police again. Her face twisted then, ugly and raw. You're going to throw away our marriage over him? David didn't even blink. Yes. Alyssa laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. You'll regret this. Everyone will know what kind of son you are. You chose a paranoid old man over your wife. I chose the truth, he said. And if you had too, we wouldn't be here. She stared at him, breathing hard, chest rising and falling like she'd just run a mile. Then, finally, she turned. As she walked down the driveway, I watched her heels click against the concrete with the rhythm of a woman who couldn't believe she'd lost. She didn't look back. Inside, David collapsed into a chair like he'd just survived an earthquake. I poured him a glass of water. He drank it without a word. Then he looked at me. I'm done. I know, I said. He didn't cry, but his hands shook. That night, we received an email from Alyssa's attorney, cease and desist language, threats about reputation damage, and vague accusations of illegal surveillance. Frank read it over the next morning and laughed. She's panicking, he said, trying to scare you. Let her try. David started divorce proceedings that week. Quietly, deliberately. He also sent a long message to everyone who commented on Alyssa's post. Not angry, not defensive, just the truth. Some apologized, some didn't. But the seed was planted, and slowly, the silence around us shifted from dread to relief. I didn't leave right away, not because I was afraid to, not because I was waiting for an apology that would never come. but because I needed to make sure David could stand on his own without someone whispering in his ear or manipulating his every move. For weeks, the house felt like a space between worlds, a quiet purgatory where one life had ended and another hadn't quite begun. And in that time, something changed in him. He woke up earlier, took phone calls outside, started cooking for himself, real meals, not frozen nonsense. I noticed the way he cleaned the fridge, tossing out old condiments Alyssa had insisted on buying from some health blog. He changed the curtains in the kitchen, put photos back on the walls. Our family, our real family, smiling from a time before lies took root. We didn't talk much about the divorce, only when it was necessary. She didn't fight it, not really. Her lawyer tried to slow things down with paperwork and noise, but the evidence was overwhelming. The emotional abuse, the financial fraud, the footage, even the quiet testimony of a neighbor who'd seen her slip out on those Tuesday nights with a gym bag and lipstick that didn't match her usual tone. It all built a picture no amount of crocodile tears could wash away. David kept me in the loop, showed me every message, every filed motion. Every time she tried to twist the narrative, he stood firm. "I can't believe how blind I was," he said one night as we sat on the back porch. "You lived in this house for 5 months, and I didn't really see you. I just let her make you into a problem." I didn't answer right away, just took a slow sip of my coffee and let the breeze settle around us. "You saw what you needed to see," I finally said. "Until you didn't. I let her break you under my roof." I turned to him. "No, she did that. You just handed her the hammer." He winced. "That's worse." "Maybe," I said, "but now you're the one picking up the pieces." He stared at the horizon for a long moment. "How do I fix this?" I shook my head. "You don't fix it. You learn from it. You live differently. You make sure no one else in your life feels the way I felt sitting in that guest room every night, like a ghost in my own family." That silence after hit harder than any shout could have. The next morning, I packed. It wasn't a dramatic exit. No fight. No scene. Just a small suitcase, my books, a few shirts, and the #OneDad mug, washed clean and wrapped in an old t-shirt. David came into the guest room as I zipped the bag closed. "You don't have to go," he said again, softer this time, like he already knew the answer. "I do," I replied. He looked down. "Where will you go?" "My brother's place for now. Maybe after that, I'll find something smaller. Quiet. With a porch." David nodded. "I'll come visit." I smiled. "Only if you bring pie." He chuckled, but his eyes were glassy. We walked to the door together. I paused at the threshold, turned back to look at the living room, the place where Alyssa's lies unraveled, where truth hit like a hammer, and where my son finally remembered who he was. "You know," I said, hand on the doorknob, "I don't hate her." David raised an eyebrow. "You don't?" "No," I said. "She showed me something I needed to see. Not about her, but about myself. I thought I was done, that I'd outlived my purpose. She reminded me I still have fight in me." David swallowed hard. "Be better than both of us," I told him. "And don't let anyone dim you again, not even someone you love." He nodded. "I promise." I stepped out into the sun, the weight of 5 long months lifting with each footstep down the front path. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned back. He stood in the doorway, my son. No longer the shadow of a husband, or the guilt-ridden boy who couldn't speak up. He was something new now, something solid. I gave him a small salute. He smiled and shut the door, not to push me away, but to begin again. And for the first time in months, I breathed. Really breathed. It's been 3 months since I left David's house. I count them not in days or weeks, but in sunrises on my brother's porch, in cups of strong coffee without tension in the air, in nights where I fall asleep without wondering if I'm an inconvenience. Time moves differently when you're not waiting for the other shoe to drop. It glides, smooth and slow, like a boat cutting across still water. My brother, Mike, was glad to have me. We hadn't lived under the same roof since we were in our 20s, sharing a shoebox of an apartment and arguing over who left dishes in the sink. But now, we sat in rocking chairs like old men in a country song, trading stories and aches, laughing about how stubborn we both used to be, and still are. "You really pulled a move outta an old detective novel," Mike said one evening, beer in hand, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "Cameras, footage, the whole 9 yards. I chuckled. I was outnumbered and underestimated. Figured I'd use it to my advantage. He raised his bottle. To quiet men with long memories. I clinked my glass to his. The peace I felt here wasn't flashy. It didn't parade itself or demand to be seen. It just existed in the little things. The way Mike didn't flinch when I coughed. The way he asked how I liked my eggs in the morning and actually remembered. The way no one questioned why I took my coffee black or why I needed silence after breakfast. It was healing. That's what it was. David called once a week. No more, no less. At first, I wondered if it was guilt driving him, but the longer we talked, the more I realized he was trying to rebuild, not just our relationship, but himself. He was in therapy now. Said it helped him make sense of how he'd let Alyssa take over his voice without even realizing it. She didn't just lie to you, Dad, he said during one call. She lied to me about who I was, what I could say, how I should act. I thought I was being a good husband by keeping the peace. But really, I was just disappearing. I know the feeling, I said. He paused, then added, I should have stood up for you sooner. You stood up when it mattered. A week after that, I got a letter from a neighbor back on David Street. Mrs. Ellison, an older woman with a talent for gardening and gossip in equal measure. Dear Mr. Thompson, just wanted you to know folks around here are talking, but not the way Alyssa hoped. Most people saw through her little online performance. And after the police visit, let's just say no one's buying what she's selling. You've got allies here. Quiet ones, but real. P.S. Your tomatoes were the best we've had on this block. Miss seeing you out there. I read it twice before folding it up and sliding it into my book. The house went up for sale shortly after. David couldn't stand to live there anymore. Said every room felt like a haunted reminder. I didn't blame him. Some spaces carry too many echoes to ever be peaceful again. I drove by it once. Just once. The for sale sign tilted in the lawn, sun-faded, flapping slightly in the wind. The blinds were drawn. The porch lights still worked. But the house had the feel of a story that was over. Not tragic. Not triumphant. Just closed. I didn't stop. Just kept driving. Alyssa never reached out again. No calls. No emails. No carefully worded letters full of half apologies and justifications. Maybe her lawyer advised against it. Maybe she knew she had nothing left to say. Either way, her silence was the cleanest closure I could ask for. David asked once if I'd ever forgive her. I told him the truth. Forgiveness is complicated. But I'm not angry anymore. Is that the same thing? No, I said. But it's enough. The truth is, I learned something in that house. Something about who I am and what I will never allow again. I am not a burden. I am not disposable. I am not some fading shadow meant to sit quietly in the corner while others decide what happens to me. I am still here, and I still matter. David asked me recently if I'd consider moving closer, maybe an apartment a few blocks from his new place. Just so I can stop by, he said. Check in. I smiled and said I'd think about it. The truth is, I might. Not for him. Not for what was broken, but for what we're slowly rebuilding. Still, I need time. Time to stretch out this piece and make it mine. Time to breathe. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family, only to find clarity and strength on the other side of betrayal?